Across the Atlantic, black waves rolled beneath a moonless sky. A convoy of American cargo ships moved silently toward Europe, carrying within their steel hulls crates of ammunition, fuel, and food, the lifeblood of the Allied front. Far below, in the icy waters, a Nazi iron wolf slithered through the dark. When the clock struck midnight, alarms wailed, and within minutes the night sea erupted in flames. A massive freighter sank into the depths, dragging with it hundreds of lives and countless hopes. The scene repeated week after week, haunting an entire nation. In Washington, Navy reports left everyone stunned. Dozens of ships were lost every month. Production lagged behind. Building a single Liberty ship took more than 230 days, while each day German U-boats tore the sea apart with torpedoes. The numbers weren't mere statistics. They were the rhythm of lives lost, of time running faster than artillery shells. Unless the U.S. found a way to accelerate shipbuilding, the entire Atlantic lifeline could collapse, and the war might end in disaster. In smoke-filled rooms echoing with typewriters, people talked of steel, ships, and manpower, but no one had an answer. The old shipyards were stretched to their limits, skilled workers were scarce, and methods had changed little in centuries. Everyone believed shipbuilding was an art, something that demanded patience and craftsmanship. No one thought a vessel the size of a Liberty ship could ever be mass-produced. But on the West Coast, one man, not a sailor, not a shipbuilder, was looking at the problem through different eyes. Henry John Kaiser, then in his 50s, was no naval engineer. He was a contractor, the man who had built massive bridges and hydroelectric dams along the Colorado River, a man familiar with the clang of hammers, the roar of bulldozers, and the dust of cement. He knew little about the sea, but he understood people and the laws of productivity. To him, any task could be divided, standardized, and reorganized. When he heard the Navy was desperate to speed up shipbuilding, Kaiser didn't scoff or shake his head like others. He simply said a sentence that stunned the committee. "We don't need more time. We need a new way of thinking." To traditional engineers, it was heresy. But to Kaiser, it was common sense. He had spent his life doing the impossible, building the Hoover Dam in the desert, carving highways through mountains in months, digging canals no one dared attempt. He believed that if humans could forge steel, they could also forge process. So he proposed an experiment, a small project to test whether industrial thinking could change the course of the war. When Kaiser visited a traditional shipyard, he was speechless. Thousands of men labored amid fire and smoke, riveting enormous steel plates with hammers that weighed dozens of pounds. Each strike echoed like thunder. Each seam took hours. A ship required millions of rivets, and every mistake weakened the hull. We are hammering away at time itself, Kaiser thought, while the war won't wait. Back in his office, he stared at the blueprints. What if, instead of riveting, we welded, he wondered. What if instead of building an entire ship in one place, we made it in parts, the bow, the stern, the engine room, and then assembled them like an automobile? Simple ideas, yet revolutionary in shipbuilding. To Kaiser, they weren't risks, they were inevitabilities. But when he presented his plan to the Maritime Commission, many scoffed. "You have never built a ship in your life, and now you want to teach the shipbuilding industry?" Kaiser didn't argue. He just smiled calmly, eyes burning with quiet fire. He knew they didn't believe him, but he also knew he was right. At that moment, America stood at a crossroads. Troops were advancing in North Africa. Britain endured nightly bombings, and all of Europe depended on every barrel of oil, every gun, every ton of food crossing the Atlantic. A cargo ship wasn't just steel, it was the bloodstream of the free world. Losing one meant losing a heartbeat in that vast body. Kaiser understood that not through statistics, but from instinct. The instinct of a builder who had seen thousands of workers pour sweat for a shared purpose. He believed wars weren't won by weapons alone, but by productivity. When he first stepped onto the muddy ground by San Francisco Bay, the future site of the Richmond shipyards, the wind carried the tang of salt and oil. There was nothing yet, just cranes and empty earth. But in Kaiser's eyes, he saw a massive assembly line, steel flowing like blood through arteries, men and women, farmers, clerks, mechanics, united in creation. He knew he couldn't do it alone, but he believed that with the right organization, anyone could become a shipbuilder. That night, sitting by his window, watching city lights shimmer on the water, Kaiser wasn't thinking of glory or profit. He thought of sons heading to war, of convoys sinking, of millions placing their faith in something he hadn't yet built. "If I fail, thousands will never return," he whispered. To him, that wasn't a promise, it was a command. Weeks later, the first machines roared to life in Richmond. Few knew they were witnessing history. They only saw a middle-aged man in a hard hat, walking through clouds of steel dust, speaking to workers with firm conviction. He didn't talk about victory or honor, only about speed, organization, and belief. The war raged on, the ocean kept swallowing ships, but on a quiet stretch of California's coast, a revolution had begun. Without guns or explosions, only the sound of metal striking metal. The sound of survival. And in that rhythm, Kaiser understood he wasn't just building ships, he was building hope for all humanity. The early days at Richmond were chaos, a jumble of mud, steel, and laughter. People came from everywhere: carpenters, farmhands, office clerks, electricians, even housewives who held a welding torch for the first time. None of them knew how to build a ship, and few understood the magnitude of what they were contributing to. But in Henry Kaiser's eyes, each person was a vital link, an irreplaceable part of the giant machine he was constructing in his mind. To him, a ship was no longer a single monolithic block of steel carved from start to finish. It was an assembly of thousands of parts, hundreds of sections, each of which could be made somewhere else and then joined together. Kaiser didn't see a completed vessel, he saw the process of creating it. In that vision, everything could be divided, organized, and optimized, like a symphony of industry. Kaiser held one unshakable belief: production is also an art, the art of organization. And he began to paint that masterpiece. While naval engineers scoffed, insisting that shipbuilding was a craft that couldn't be simplified, Kaiser turned instead to ordinary workers. He listened to their frustrations about endless riveting, warped plates, and long hours waiting for each step to finish. He didn't lecture or command. He simply asked, "If you could do it differently, how would you?" That question, so simple yet so radical, woke the whole yard. For the first time, workers felt that their voices mattered. From hundreds of those conversations, Kaiser and his engineers devised something unprecedented: the modular ship assembly line. Instead of building the hull first, they divided each ship into 12 major sections.
Each module was fabricated in a separate area by a dedicated team, then welded together by massive cranes, like assembling giant steel Lego pieces on the shoreline. To make this possible, Kaiser needed a technology many still distrusted: electric welding. For decades, shipbuilding had relied on rivets, the proud symbol of old mechanical might. But welding was faster, lighter, and most importantly, required far less experience. Kaiser knew war left no time to train master riveters. He needed results in weeks, not years. When his trusted engineer, Clay Bedford, proposed on-site training programs, Kaiser agreed immediately. Within 2 weeks, young women from office jobs were welding, and farmers fresh off their fields were reading blueprints. On their sleeves they wore the emblem of a new spirit, Rosie the Riveter. But at Richmond, they didn't rivet, they welded, and they were proud of it. Every morning, Kaiser walked the shop floors with a notebook in hand. He didn't sit in an office, he stood amid the noise and the smoke. When he saw a young worker struggling with a torch, he stopped, offering calm, steady advice. Nothing's hard, you just haven't found the right way yet. People said he remembered hundreds of names, and each worker felt they were part of something far greater than themselves. By mid-1942, the results began to show. Kaiser's first ship was completed in 197 days, still long, but nearly half the previous standard. The skeptics fell silent. He didn't celebrate. He simply said, "We've learned to run. Now it's time to fly." He urged engineers to document every step, to find what could be shortened, what could be done simultaneously. When one team suggested installing the deck as soon as the hull was welded, skipping the usual waiting period, Kaiser simply nodded. Try it. When they succeeded, his laughter echoed through the yard. "That's the Richmond spirit," he shouted. Week by week, the assembly lines ran smoother. Workers devised new ways to save time, pre-cutting steel plates to standard sizes, welding in pairs, checking with templates instead of hand measurements. These innovations didn't come from engineers, they came from the very hands once thought unskilled. Kaiser called it the power of ordinary people when they're trusted. But success brought pressure. The Navy demanded faster output. The War Department wanted proof that Kaiser's methods could scale nationwide. Everyone waited for a miracle. Kaiser decided to make one. In the fall of 1942, he boldly announced that he would build a ship in less than a week. America was stunned. Newspapers mocked it as the boast of a dreamer. Generals shook their heads. Kaiser didn't answer with words, he answered with action. On November 8, 1942, thousands of Richmond workers began an extraordinary shift. Lights blazed through the night, cranes swung without pause, and welders worked in shifts around the clock. They ate and slept on site, sparks flying like falling stars in the dark. Piece by piece, the modules came together, and at dawn on the 5th day, the SS Robert E. Peary slid into the water, completed in 4 days and 15 hours. The world was astonished. The press called it the greatest industrial miracle in human history. President Roosevelt sent his congratulations. But Kaiser stood silently by the pier, watching the ship glide into the morning light. He knew this was not his victory. It was the victory of thousands who had believed that the impossible could be done. From that moment, Henry Kaiser was no longer the outsider. He became the symbol of a new America, one of speed, faith, and collective creativity. But for him, it was only the beginning. In his mind, he saw not one shipyard, but hundreds, not thousands of workers, but millions, all applying the same method to produce faster, cheaper, and better than ever before. He knew the war was far from over, and he knew that if industry could be a weapon, then human thinking itself was the ultimate force that could decide the fate of nations. And that night, long after the city slept, Kaiser sat by the window, watching the last sparks from the shipyard fade into the sky. He felt no pride, only quiet relief. He had proven that an outsider could transform an entire industry, not through genius, but through belief, that anyone, given the chance and the guidance, could do something extraordinary. And in that stillness, Henry Kaiser smiled. He understood at last, sometimes it is only those who don't know the limits who are brave enough to break them.
Winter, 1942. San Francisco Bay lay cold and shrouded in fog. Each morning, a veil of mist covered the water, making the Richmond shipyard seem like it floated in a cloud of white smoke. Yet inside, the industrial lights burned day and night. The clang of steel, the groaning of cranes, the rhythm of thousands of footsteps merged into an unending symphony. To Henry Kaiser, this was not just a shipyard. It was the beating heart of America. After the miracle of the SS Robert E. Peary, Richmond became the symbol of industrial magic. Journalists, generals, and engineers from across the country came to see the place where men turned steel into ships in 4 days. But what they found wasn't a gleaming modern factory. It was a city of people, makeshift barracks, crowded canteens, and teams working in non-stop shifts. They came from everywhere, north and south, black and white, men and women. There were no class lines here, only one mission: speed and quality. Kaiser understood that to win, he had to organize not only machines, but people. So he built something unseen in heavy industry, a community of respect, care, and purpose. He built a hospital inside the shipyard, the first model of Kaiser Permanente, where healthcare was no longer a privilege, but a right. He opened night schools for workers, offered scholarships for their children, and arranged flexible shifts so women could both work and care for their families. None of them thought they were doing something historic, but when each ship left the dock and the American flag fluttered above its deck, they felt a quiet pride, knowing their hands had touched history. Inside, the shipyard ran like a living machine powered by human heartbeat. Hull sections rose on cranes, welders swarmed like bees, and each motion followed a precise rhythm. A single error could ruin a module, but through overlapping shifts and parallel checks, Kaiser turned a once slow craft into a seamless chain of motion. No waiting, no idle moments, everything moved. He introduced parallel production. While the hull was being welded, the engines were assembled elsewhere. As the deck was painted, propellers were already waiting at the dock. Every task meshed together like perfect gears. Some called it the Liberty Line, but Kaiser simply said, "It's just logic. If two things can be done at once, do them at once." He inspired as much as he organized. Each morning, before work began, he stood on a wooden platform and addressed the crowd of thousands with a calm, deep voice. "Do you know why we work here? Not for money, not for fame, but because out there people are fighting, and they live only if our ships sail in time." Those words, simple yet powerful, replaced slogans. People worked with conviction and dignity. They weren't just workers, they were part of the front line. The Richmond model spread faster than anyone imagined. Within a year, Kaiser's system was adopted in 18 shipyards across America. Liberty ship production quadrupled. On average, one ship launched every 3 days without losing quality. The ships were rough but resilient, enduring bombs and storms alike. On many nights, long after the shifts ended, Kaiser stayed behind, walking along the docks. He listened to the sea hitting steel, the wind through cranes. To him, those sounds were the pulse of life, something war tried to destroy. In his small office, surrounded by blueprints covered with arrows, he thought of the ships crossing the Atlantic and the convoys heading toward Berlin. He knew every hour saved at Richmond shortened the road to victory. Not everyone agreed. Veteran engineers dismissed his methods as crude, fit for mass production, but not fine shipbuilding. But as dozens of ships launched each month, and as reports came of Allied victories fueled by Liberty ships, the critics fell silent. Doubt gave way to admiration. Richmond became the symbol of industrial America, where limits were meant to be broken. Streets grew around the yard, schools, hospitals, stores, even cinemas. People called it a war city, but Kaiser called it the city of the future, where labor and dignity could coexist. One winter evening in 1943, with snow dusting the rooftops, Kaiser was invited to speak before thousands of workers. He brought no notes. Holding his worn hardcap, he said quietly, "I didn't build this shipyard alone. You did. When the world said it couldn't be done, you proved that with faith, there are no limits. This isn't just a place that builds ships. It's a place that builds the future." Applause thundered like waves. Many wept, not from his words, but because they knew they had lived something unforgettable. As the war neared the end, Richmond was no longer just a shipyard. It was a machine of victory. From here, over 1,400 Liberty ships sailed to keep the lifelines across the Atlantic. Each ship carried a message. America would not yield, and the power of ordinary people could change the course of war. Henry Kaiser, once mocked as the crazy outsider, was now hailed as the shipbuilder of freedom. But he never called himself a hero. "I just believed in people, and they proved me right." At night, Richmond's lights still glowed across the bay, reflecting on the water like 1,000 stars. Those stars did not belong to the sky. They belonged to human hands, to the belief that even in war, creativity and compassion could still bloom. And in that glow, Henry Kaiser looked out into the distance. He knew the war would end someday, but the revolution he had started, the revolution of faith, organization, and new thinking, would live on beyond Richmond, beyond its era, reminding humanity that greatness is born not from experience, but from the courage to be different.
The North Atlantic in the winter of 1943 was a nightmare. The fog was thick, the waves towered like steel walls,
and beneath the surface lurked the gray wolves, Nazi Germany's U-boats, silent and deadly. They hunted every Allied convoy, cutting off the vital lifeline between America and Britain. Countless sailors perished in the freezing sea, their burning ships vanishing before they could send a distress signal. The world seemed to be suffocating under the iron grip of war. Then, new silhouettes began to appear across the ocean, boxy, rough, and far from elegant, yet radiating an indomitable vitality. The Liberty ships. They were the offspring of Richmond, of Portland, of the shipyards where Henry Kaiser and hundreds of thousands of workers labored without rest. And it was these ships that rewrote the survival map of the free world. At first, people mocked them. Swimming steel boxes, they sneered. They were slow, only 11 knots, lightly armored, barely armed. But what terrified the enemy wasn't one ship, it was thousands. For every ship sunk, 3 more left the docks. For every convoy lost, 10 more took its place. Germany could not sink America. In the frozen darkness, Liberty ships stretched across the sea like an endless procession, signal lights blinking through the fog. On deck, sailors bundled in heavy coats shivered in the wind, but their hearts were warm, knowing that behind them stood a nation giving them strength. In every engine's rumble beat the heart of Richmond, the breath of millions of unseen laborers. The convoys carried everything: food, ammunition, tanks, planes, fuel, even letters, trembling words from home. Without these ships, there would be no Normandy landing, no liberation of Europe. Each Liberty ship was a lifeline through the heart of war, sustaining the armies at the front. In June 1944, the skies over France blazed white with thousands of parachutes. The largest invasion in human history had begun. Behind that massive force, hundreds of Liberty ships carried hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies, quietly braving the waves, landing cargo as soon as the beaches were secured. They had no cannons, no medals, but they were the silent army that kept the invasion alive. There were stories history rarely tells, like the SS Stephen Hopkins, a small Liberty ship lost in the Atlantic that stumbled upon the German cruiser Steer. Instead of surrendering, her crew chose to fight. They fired until their last shell, the flames from their ship lighting the night sky. Steer went down, and so did Stephen Hopkins, but their courage spread across the seas, a message carried by fire. We do not just carry cargo, we carry hope. Across Europe, Liberty ships arrived ceaselessly, creating a logistical flow the world had never seen. In every port, from Liverpool to Cherbourg, from Naples to Antwerp, people saw ships named after heroes, poets, professors, even the unknown. Kaiser wanted every ship to carry a story, a soul, a reminder that war could not erase humanity. Even the workers at Richmond could hardly believe the numbers. 2,710 Liberty ships built in just 3 years, each over 130 meters long, weighing 14,000 tons. Lined up bow to stern, they could form a steel bridge across half the Pacific. A modern wonder of the world, wrote Life magazine. But to Kaiser, that wonder was simply the power of belief. From his office on the West Coast, he followed every report, every transmission from Liberty convoys battling through the storms. He never saw them, but he could imagine the faces, the sailors, the welders, the people who once stood beside him in the yard. And when he learned that hundreds of thousands of lives had been saved because of these ships, he knew every sleepless night had been worth it. Beyond the battlefield, the Liberty ship became a cultural icon. In wartime films, they sailed behind departing soldiers. In poems, they were the sails of freedom.
Children drew them in classrooms, women pasted their photos on factory walls, and every launch was celebrated with brass bands and cheers. In a country divided by race, class, and prejudice, the Liberty ship stood as a symbol of unity, proof that when people believe in one purpose, miracles can happen. Yet behind the glory lay sacrifice. More than 200 Liberty ships were sunk. Thousands of sailors never returned. But that loss only made the surviving ships bear a spiritual weight greater than any weapon. Each time a new ship launched, Kaiser stood silently for a moment, watching it slide into the water, then whispered, "Go, my steel friend. Carry the world through this storm." By the end of 1945, as the guns fell silent, the world looked back and realized it was these plain, clumsy ships that had saved civilization. Without them, the Allied supply lines would have collapsed, the war dragged on for years, and millions more would have starved in besieged cities. A historian wrote, "If the Spitfire and the Sherman were weapons of combat, the Liberty ship was the weapon of survival." When peace came, many Liberty ships continued to serve, carrying refugees, delivering relief supplies, before being retired, sold, or dismantled. But in the memory of a generation, they never rusted. They remained the image of endurance, ingenuity, and faith. Proof that science and humanity could stand together against darkness. One summer day in 1946, Henry Kaiser returned to Richmond. The hammers were silent now. Only the echo of waves remained. He walked among the empty docks, his hand brushing the worn steel railings. He remembered the sleepless nights, the faces streaked with sweat, the laughter mixed with the crackle of welding torches. It all felt like a distant dream. Yet deep inside, he knew he had witnessed something few ever do, the true strength of people who believe in one another. He stood for a long time, and then turned to leave the harbor, its colors faded by time. On a weathered wall, an old slogan still lingered, "Liberty ships will save the world." He smiled. What once seemed like propaganda had become truth. The world had indeed been saved, not by miracles, but by ordinary men and women with calloused hands and steadfast hearts, who built the ships of freedom.
When the final smoke of World War II began to fade, the world emerged from its nightmare with a strange weariness. The Liberty ships that had once sliced through the oceans now lay still at the docks, paint peeling, hulls rusting. But for Henry Kaiser, the war's end was not the closing of a book, only the end of a chapter. He once said, "If we could build a ship in 4 days, then we can rebuild the world just as fast, if only we believe in people." Kaiser returned to Richmond on a foggy morning. The shipyards were silent, only the wind whistling through the steel frames. The workers' barracks had been dismantled, the railway tracks covered in moss. He stood there for a long while, then quietly told his secretary, "What we built here wasn't just steel, it was spirit, and that spirit, we won't let it disappear." From that thought began Henry Kaiser's new journey, a revolution in peacetime. He turned his focus to healthcare, education, housing, and energy, things he believed must be built with the same faith we use to build ships. Throughout his life, he never forgot what made the Liberty ships legendary: ordinary people who, when trusted and supported, could achieve the extraordinary. He saw a pressing problem. Millions of workers who had served the war effort were now jobless, uninsured, and without medical care.
From the community clinic he had founded in Richmond, Kaiser created the Kaiser Permanente system, a non-profit healthcare organization where workers could receive affordable, respectful care as human beings, not as labor machines. Many were skeptical. An engineer wants to be a doctor? They scoffed. But they forgot that Kaiser was never truly an engineer. He was a man who thought through understanding people. He hired the best physicians and placed them at the center, not the insurance companies. The result was a groundbreaking model in America at the time: comprehensive preventative care, blending science, management, and compassion. From a few thousand members in Richmond, Kaiser Permanente spread across California, then nationwide, becoming one of the cornerstones of modern healthcare. It was the natural continuation of Kaiser's philosophy. The health of a nation lies not in its steel or concrete, but in the hearts and lungs of the people who build it. At the same time, his vision expanded further. Building the Hoover and Shasta dams, interstate highways, cars, even an airline. Kaiser Industries became a vast conglomerate, yet at its heart remained a single philosophy: to create something better for people. Someone once asked, "Aren't you afraid of failure?" Kaiser smiled. "If I feared failure, I would never have built a ship in 4 days." By the 1950s, America had entered an age of prosperity. Families were buying homes, cars, televisions, glimpses of the future. But while other industrialists chased profit, Henry Kaiser chose another path. He established scholarships, funded medical research, built universities. When asked about his greatest legacy, he never mentioned wealth. He simply said, "I leave behind people. People who know they can change the world." As he grew older, he became more reflective. During one interview, a reporter asked, "Do you think America truly understands the value of the Liberty ships?" He looked distant for a moment and replied, "They may have forgotten what the ships looked like, but they still live by their spirit. Every time you believe that the impossible can become possible, that's a Liberty ship sailing in your heart." In August 1967, Henry Kaiser passed away at the age of 85 in his home by Lake Tahoe. His death was quiet, unlike the mighty works he had created. Yet at his farewell, hundreds of workers, doctors, engineers, and nurses who had once worked with him sent flowers and handwritten letters. One note contained only a single line: "Thank you for believing in us when no one else did." Time moved on. The world changed. The Liberty ships slowly vanished from the seas. Some were dismantled, others sank. Only a few remain as witnesses of history. But whenever someone steps on the steel deck of the SS Jeremiah O'Brien, one of the last surviving Liberty ships, they can still feel that era's breath, the clang of steel, the whisper of wind, and perhaps somewhere the laughter of the workers of Richmond. In California stands a small statue, not grand, just a figure of Henry Kaiser gazing towards the sea, helmet in hand, face thoughtful. At its base are the words, "You taught us that nothing is impossible as long as we believe together." Kaiser's legacy does not lie in concrete or steel, but in a new way of thinking, the mindset of one who dared to go beyond boundaries. He proved that an outsider could transform an entire industry, that faith in people is stronger than any process, and that creativity is not a privilege of technocrats, but the instinct of a heart driven to serve. Today, whenever a great project is completed or an organization puts people before profit, Kaiser's imprint remains. From Kaiser Permanente hospitals to engineering programs, from cargo ships to clean energy projects, all are fragments of the great mosaic he began over 80 years ago. If the Liberty ships were symbols of strength in wartime, then Kaiser Permanente is a symbol of compassion in peace. One saved the world from darkness, the other preserves it in light. And between them stands a man, Henry Kaiser, who proved that industry, too, could have a soul. In the turbulent story of the 20th century, among the names of generals, politicians, and inventors, Henry Kaiser stands apart not for power, but for his faith in the simplest thing of all, humanity. And in the wind blowing from the ocean through Richmond, if you listen closely, you might still hear the faint echoes of steel and surf, and his deep, steady voice. Ships may rust, but faith does not. For only faith keeps us afloat on the great sea of history. And so, though the war is long over and the old shipyards now silent, the legacy of Henry Kaiser lives on in every hospital, every bridge, every person who dares to believe in the impossible. The Liberty ships saved the world, but Henry Kaiser, the man who lit their fire, saved our faith in humanity.